What's up guys, this is Massey. Welcome to another video. In this video I want to talk about factorial notation. Factorial notation is the continued product of first n natural numbers, and that's called factorial of n, or n factorial, and it is shown like that, n factorial. We call it n factorial. So n factorial is going to be 1 times 2 times 3 all the way to n, or you can write it even as n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 times n minus 3, and so on until you get to 1. There are some notes involved. N factorial equals to n times n minus 1 factorial. What does that mean? If you go back in here, n factorial is n times n minus 1 times n minus 2. As you consider n and n in here, the rest of it looks like you get n minus 1 factorial. That's how it's defined. So n factorial equals to n times n minus 1 factorial. Or you can say n factorial equals to n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 factorial, which you have it in here. So n factorial equals to n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 factorial. And very two important notes, 0 factorial is 1, and 1 factorial is 1 as well. So 0 factorial and 1 factorial, both of them are 1. Let's see some examples. What is 4 factorial? You're going to say 4 factorial equals to 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is going to be equal to 24. Now what is 7 factorial? 7 factorial is going to be 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. That's going to be 5040. Now what is 4 factorial plus 7 minus 1 factorial? So 4 factorial, we already got it, that's 24. 7 minus 5 factorial is 2 factorial, and 2 factorial is 2 times 1. So the answer is going to be 24 plus 2 equals to 26. What's next example? Next example is 17 minus 15 factorial multiplied by 2 factorial. 17 minus 15 factorial is 2 factorial times 2 factorial. 2 factorial is 2 times 1, which is 2, times 2. It is going to be equal to 4. Now, what is 6 factorial over 5 factorial? 6 factorial is 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And here we have 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Now let's calculate each of them. That's going to be 720. And 5 factorial is going to be 120. 720 divided by 120 is going to be 6. On the other hand, based on the notes we had, I can write 6 factorial as 6 times 5 factorial. So let's divide it by 5 factorial. 5 factorial and 5 factorial cancel out, and we're going to end up having 6 there. Now next example, 17 minus 13 factorial divided by 2 factorial. In that case, I'm going to say 17 minus 13 is 4 factorial divided by 2 factorial. So it's going to be 4 times 3 times 2 factorial divided by 2 factorial. 2 factorial and 2 factorial cancel out. 4 times 3 is going to be 12. So the final answer is 12. Next example is 8 factorial over 5 factorial. 8 factorial is 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 factorial. Here we have 5 factorial. So it means that 5 factorial and 5 factorial cancel out, and the answer is going to be 8 times 7 times 6, which will be 336. Next example, 0 factorial divided by 4 factorial. 0 factorial, we already said, is going to be equal to 1. 4 factorial is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is going to be 1 over 24. 3 factorial over 5 factorial, we have 3 factorial over 5 times 4 times 3 factorial. You cancel out, it's going to be 1 over 5 times 4, which is going to be 1 over 20. 38 factorial divided by 35 factorial multiplied by 3 factorial. That's going to be 38 multiplied by 37 multiplied by 36 multiplied by 35 factorial divided by 35 factorial multiplied by 3 times 2 times 1. Then we need to use the calculator to find out the answer. So it's going to be 38 times 37 times 36 divided by 3 times 2 times 1, because 35 and 35 factorial cancel out. So numerator is going to be 5,616 and denominator we have 6. So when I divide it by 6, I will get 8,436. Now next example, what is n factorial over n minus 3 factorial? We're going to say n factorial is n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 times n minus 3 factorial divided by n minus 3 factorial. Now n minus 3 factorial and n minus 3 factorial cancel out, and the answer is going to be n times n minus 1 times n minus 2. Next example, 2n factorial divided by 2n minus 3 factorial. So 2n factorial, we can write it as 2n times 2n minus 1 times 2n minus 2 times 2n minus 3 factorial divided by 2n minus 3 factorial. So when you cancel them, it's going to be 2n times 2n minus 1 times 2n minus 2. You can leave it like that. Or if you want, you can FOIL it. Next example, n plus 1 factorial divided by n minus 1 factorial, which will be n plus 1 times n minus 1 factorial divided by n minus 1 factorial, which is going to be n plus 1 times n. Next one, n minus 1 divided by n minus 1 factorial divided by n minus 3 factorial. We're going to say that's going to be equal to n minus 1 times n minus 2 times n minus 3 factorial divided by n minus 3 factorial, which is going to be n minus 1 times n minus 2. Next one, n minus 3 factorial divided by n minus 1 factorial. That case, I'm going to say n minus 3 factorial divided by n minus 1 times n minus 2 times n minus 3 factorial, which is going to be 1 over n minus 1 times n minus 2. That's going to be the answer. Now let's see another type of examples. Assume that we have 15 factorial over 9 factorial over 6 factorial plus 15 factorial over 10 factorial over 5 factorial. That case, we're going to say that's 15 times 14 times 13 times 12 times 11 times 10 times 9 factorial over 9 factorial times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 9 factorial and 9 factorial cancel out. And here, what we can do, 6 and 2 cancel out with the 12. So we're going to say, yep, and 5, I'm going to write it like that. 15 times 14 times 13 times 12 times 11 times 10 divided by 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Now what you see here, 6 and 2 is going to be 12. They cancel out with 12. 5 and 10 cancel out, and you're going to end up having 2 there. And what we can do, we can say 3 and 15. That's going to leave me with 5 in here. And 4 is going to be 2. And here we're going to have 7. So we're going to end up having 5 times 7 times 13 times 11 times 2 divided by 2. Then 2 and 2 cancel out. It's going to be 5 times 7 times 13 times 11, which will be 35 times 11 times 13. That's going to be 5,005. That's basically how we simplify. Now the second fraction is going to be 15 factorial over 10 factorial or 5 factorial. That's going to be 15 times 14 times 13 times 12 times 11 times 10 factorial over 10 factorial times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. These two cancel out. Then I can say 5 and 3 cancel out with 15, and 4 and 12, that's going to leave me 3 here, and 2 and 14 leave me 7. So it's going to be 7 times 13 times 3 times 11 divided by 1, which is going to be nothing. So 7 times 13 times 3 times 11, that's going to leave me 3,000. So that's going to be 5005 plus 3003. It's going to give me 8008. Now let's do 15 factorial, 11 factorial, and 4 factorial, which is going to be 15 times 14 times 13 times 12 times 11 factorial over 11 factorial times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 11 factorial and 11 factorial cancel out. Is going to be 15 times 14 times 13 times 12 divided by 4 by 3 by 2 by 1. 2 and 3 is going to be 6. With 12 cancel out is going to be 2. 2 and 4 cancel out is going to be 2. 2 is with 7. It's going to leave me 15 times 7 times 13. It's going to be 15 times 7 times 13. It's going to be 1365. Now, if you have 4 factorial times 6 factorial divided by 5 factorial, what do you get? If we have 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. For 6 factorial, I can write 6 times 5 factorial divided by 5 factorial. So these two cancel out. It's going to be 6 times 4 times 3 times 2, which will be, did it to the quick calculator, it's going to be 6 times 4 times 3 times 2. That's going to be 144. Now I want to show you, if you have 5 factorial multiplied by 0 factorial, what do you get? 5 factorial is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Multiplied by 0 factorial is 1. So the answer is going to be 6 times 4, 24. 24 times 5, 120. Now if you have 5 times 0 factorial, that's going to be 0 factorial, which is going to be equal to 1. If you have 5 factorial plus 0 factorial, is going to be 120 plus 0 factorial is 1, is going to be 121. If you have 5 plus 0 factorial, that's going to be equal to 5 factorial, which is going to be 120. If somebody asks you to simplify the example, it says simplify the following expressions. For example, they ask you what is 5 factorial multiplied by 6 multiplied by 7. You're going to say that's going to be equal to 7 factorial, because 7 factorial is 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which 5 factorial times 6 times 7. Now if somebody asks you what is n factorial times n plus 1, in that case you're going to say that's going to be equal to n plus 1 factorial. If somebody asks you to factor fully n factorial times n squared plus 3n plus 2, you're going to say that's n factorial, and here when you factor is going to be n plus 2 times n plus 1. That's going to be equal to n plus 2 factorial. Next example would be n plus 4 times n plus 5 times n plus 3 factorial. In that case, n plus 3 times n plus 4 times n plus 5 is going to be n plus 5 factorial. Next one is going to be n minus 1 factorial times n squared plus n factorial. That's going to make it as n minus 1 factorial. When you factor that, that's going to be n times n plus 1. So it's going to leave me as n plus 1 factorial. Next example that I want to show you, 6 factorial is different from 4 factorial plus 2 factorial. You must know it by now, but when you have 6 factorial, is 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which will be 6 times 4, 24, times 5, 120, times 6 is going to be 720. And here 4 factorial is just going to be 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 plus 1 times 2, which is going to be 2 times 3, 6 times 4, 24 plus 2, which is going to be 26. As you see here, they are different. Another one I can say 6 factorial is different from 2 factorial times 3 factorial. 6 factorial is 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, as you saw it in the previous example. 2 factorial is 2, 3 factorial is 6, so it's going to be 12. As you see here, they are totally different. Next example, it's saying that simplify 2n factorial over n factorial. That's going to be 2n times 2n minus 1 times 2n minus 2 all the way to n plus 2 n plus 1 times n factorial. Divided by n factorial, it's going to be 2n times 2n minus 1 times 2n minus 2 all the way to n plus 2 times n plus 1. Another way to simplify this expression, I'm going to say 2n factorial over n factorial. That's basically is going to be 1 over n factorial, and the numerator is 2n factorial, which means that 1 times 2 times 3 times all the way to 2n, which you can write it as 1 over n factorial times, if you separate the even numbers and odd numbers, it's going to be 2 by 4 by 6 all the way to 2n, multiplied by 1 times 3 times 5 all the way to 2n minus 1. Then what you need to do, you have 1 over n factorial, 2 times 6 times 2 times 4 times 6 is going to be basically 1 times 2, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, all the way by 2 times n. And here we have 1 times 3 times 5 times all the way by 2n minus 1. Now I take all these 2's out and I factor it, which gives me 2 to the power of n, and here is going to end up having 1 times 2 times 3 all the way to n. And here we have 1 times 3 times 5 times all the way to n minus 1. So you have 1 over n factorial times 2 to the power of n times 1 times 2 times 3 times all the way n is n factorial. And here we have 1 times 3 times 5 all the way to 2n minus 1. So these two cancel out, and we're going to have 2 to the power of n 1 times 3 times 5 all the way to 2n minus 1. So you can also simplify it like this. Next example, it's going to tell me verify 3 times n plus 1 factorial over 5 times n factorial equals to 3 times n plus 1 over 5. So what I'm going to say, 3n plus 1 factorial over 5 factorial, I'm going to write this one as 3 times n plus 1 times n factorial, and here I'm going to have 5 times n factor, 5 times n factorial. So n factor and n factorial cancel out, and we have 3 times n plus 1 over 5. So as you see here, this one is proven. So basically these are different examples of factorial and simplifying factorial expression and evaluating the factorial expression. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave me a comment if you have any question, and please don't forget to subscribe this channel. You can have access to many other videos regarding math, chemistry, and physics. Thank you for watching and have a great day.